Hi again, everyone. This is Jared, AC7WH, Backyard Ham Radio, and I made a discovery. I had suspected that this was the case, but I may have at least partially proved that when you use an antenna tuner, you are tuning the circuit. Check out my previous video on this topic. You're tuning the circuit of everything involved, all components, for your transmission. In other words, the circuit that includes your transceiver, any other components like an antenna tuner, an amplifier, and the antenna. And when you do that, you should have not only a better transmitting setup, but a better receive setup. And the way that I feel like I am proving this fact is with the difference in the received signals, noise, etc. when I have my antenna tuned, so to speak. My antenna circuit, I believe, is a more accurate term. My antenna circuit tuned compared to when it is not. So what I did is I used my HF Auto antenna tuner, and I fine-tuned it manually here to the capacitor setting of 154 and the inductor setting of 538. And I was transmitting at 1930 kilohertz or 1.93 megahertz. The frequency counter was counting 1929 over here, and on my amplifier 1928. And I was able to tune the 160 meter band on this frequency with my basic antenna. Check out previous videos to find out more about that. But anyhow, I was able to tune it to anywhere from about a 1.46 or so to a 1.7 to 1. So a pretty decent match. And I noticed that when it was tuned, I could hear the noise difference, as well as you can see here, look at that. You can see, I guess you would call it a high Q tuning, where this little patch here is getting reception. It's just noise right now. It's still daytime. So I'm testing the 160 meter band at a less than ideal time for QSOs, but a great time for testing so I'm not interfering with a lot of other people. You'll notice this one little area, basically from about 1.9 to 1.95, that is tuned up, and I'm at about 1.93, go figure, right in between that. Okay, let you hear what this sounds like. I'm going to try to adjust my microphone so that you can hear this. I'm going to just do it the old-fashioned way and try placing my microphone near the speaker, and I'm going to let you hear what happens when I have my antenna tuner tuned versus when I bypass it. I'll let you hear the difference. Okay, here goes. All right, I'm going to bypass. Notice how after the initial blip that went on the screen from the relay from my antenna tuner, that the noise level has died out to where on the S meter over here, it's not even registering right now. And the waterfall is basically blank. That's in my bypass mode. Now let's go ahead and retune, and you will notice that the static will come back, which shows that we are actually receiving much more closely here on the 160 meter band. Okay, so to explain again what's happening here, it's very much like if you had an Alex loop or other mag loop antenna where you have a tuning capacitor that you can adjust, and you know that you are tuning for a decent SWR. When you hear the background noise, the static, etc., the QRM or QRN increasing until it reaches its peak, then you know that you've tuned as well as you can for that frequency using the tuning capacitor on your loop antenna. This is essentially the same thing. Even though it's the antenna tuner and it's way over here in the shack, it's essentially tuning the circuit of my antenna, my whole antenna circuit, even though the antenna length itself is obviously not being physically tuned, as I mentioned in my previous video about this topic. And it's also somewhat similar, though I realize that this is not a perfect example, it's somewhat similar to when you tune a guitar string. You are not drastically changing the length of the string. Yes, there's some stretch and so forth, but based on how you are tuning it with those thumb screws and so forth on a guitar. I don't know enough about a guitar's anatomy to be able to tell you exactly the technical terms, but when you are adjusting those tuning screws, then you're able to get each string to be at the frequency that you want. Even though all the strings on the guitar are essentially the same length, you're able to compensate and adjust up or down in frequency based on how you are tightening those strings. This is basically, in a less than perfect analogy, doing the same thing. All right, I find that fascinating, and I believe I may have at least partially proved that an antenna tuner does tune the overall transmitting and receiving circuit. Well, hope this inspires more research, and I'm curious if anybody has any additional insight or comments. Thank you so much, and 73.